Now, we use words like just awareness itself when we come into awareness. So what does that mean to come into awareness? So, well, right now we're all aware, aren't we? You're hearing my voice. You very well may be looking at the screen, hearing me. All that is because of the functioning of awareness. If you think about it, awareness is kind of one of those things that's, at least in spirituality, it's talked about quite a bit, but I'm not so sure how appreciated something like awareness or consciousness is. For this morning, I'll use these two terms in the same way. Sometimes I'll distinguish between the two, but for the sake of this morning's talk, I'll use awareness and consciousness in the same way. And like I said, awareness or consciousness is literally what makes all of our other experience possible. Our whole experience of being, of existing, of being alive, of anything and everything we do, right? The fundamental, the basis of our entire experience of being is consciousness, right? Without consciousness, we have no experience of anything else. So, which is kind of interesting because consciousness, awareness, these are terms that the average person is going to rarely, if ever, take these deeply into account, because they're just, awareness is just here. It's always part of every experience. It's that which is taking in, that which is receiving the experience. You might think of it that way. And it's part of everything. So it's kind of ironic that we often don't give this seat of appreciation for consciousness, right? We're often trying to utilize it or open it up or do something with our consciousness when I think it's a good place to start, just with a kind of appreciation that this is what consciousness is, what allows us to have the experience of anything, the perception of anything, to see anything, taste anything, hear anything, sense anything, feel anything, right? Know anything. All this arises or is dependent upon consciousness, right? Consciousness is that which also allows us to both know and not know, right? So when we say, I'm confused, can be confused if we're conscious. If we say, I'm very clear, of course, we can only be clear if we're very conscious. So, but I like to have touch points for these things like awareness, like consciousness, like what's the touch point? Like what's the access point where it's no longer an idea, no longer something we hear about, but something we can actually touch into in our own experience. We'll kind of gonna tackle the most difficult one at the beginning, which is consciousness itself, consciousness or awareness itself. It's not an easy one to have a kind of recognition of. And the strange thing is the reason for that is because it's so ever-present, so always there. And so when we go sort of looking for something, we tend to look for when we can't find something, like I've lost my keys or I've lost my glasses, and we go out looking for them, right? There's a search from where we are to where we think the thing that we want to find is. But consciousness isn't really like that, right? It's not a thing we can find. It's not a thing we can lose. It's that which is aware of finding and losing. So the thing about consciousness is we can't make it into an object, do you see? We can't make it into an object. We can't make it into a thought. We can't make it into a feeling. Of course, we can't make it into something we can see out there and go, oh, that's consciousness. Consciousness is always, you might say here, it's always the looking. In the East, they often call it the looker. I'm not a big fan of calling it the looker because that implies that there is some sort of entity called a looker that's even behind the looking. But really, there's there's just the consciousness, right? There's the consciousness. There's not something else behind that, if that makes sense. And I'm talking in our experience, because anything else that we might find and think, well, that's deeper than awareness. Of course, that is also something that's arising within awareness, arising within consciousness. Right? Even if we think something is beyond our awareness, we have to be aware to even have the thought that there's something beyond awareness. Do you see what I mean? So we're kind of, in spirituality, we're trying to get back to I often will call it the ground, right? The basis, the fundamental nature of ourselves, right? Another reason why awareness or consciousness can be challenging, because we can't make it into an object, we can't condense it into a particular experience, we can't, because it is always going to be transcendent of every experience we can come up with, every description, right? Because every description would be something that is also arising and being recognized by consciousness. And the descriptions come and go, and they get rewritten and all that. And yet the consciousness that the description is trying to describe is always there, always transcending every description, right? That doesn't mean that our descriptions have no usefulness. They can have a usefulness, but they're certainly not the same as the described is not the same as that which we're just trying to describe, right? So awareness is kind of it's kind of tricky in that sense, because you can't grab it, and yet even if you try to grab it, there's total awareness of your attempt to grab. And so awareness is tricky because it's always, we can never confine it. We can never box it in. And in that sense, it's transcendent. It's not transcendent in the sense of being some like ultimate other, or in some absolute sense different than everything else. But it's transcendent in the sense that it can't be boxed. It can't be contained. Whatever is arising, it's an arising to consciousness, within consciousness, right? At least as far as we know, right? So if we want to kind of step down to something that's a little more approachable, right? So you can have a contact point in experience. Then we can kind of go to something like presence, the sense of presence, the felt sense of presence, right? Now, presence, the feeling tone of presence is just that the feeling of being. That's presence. The feeling of simply being. I don't mean the feeling, what it feels like in your tummy or in your hand or any particular part or point, right? I don't mean necessarily how do you feel today. That's an emotional experience, right? Presence is something that's even more fundamental than that, right? It's just the sense, the feel of being, of existing. And again, if we're trying to reach out and go, I don't understand that, and we're trying to grasp it in our understanding, then we're never going to understand, because it would be like trying to grasp the taste of a banana through a description. You got to get around to eating the banana someday if you really want to know what it's like. And presence is sort of like that. It's going to transcend all of our descriptions of it, and yet just that the simple sense of being. As we get a little quieter, quietness itself has a kind of presence to it. The presence of quiet. Often quiet can feel still. That doesn't mean that there's no movement anywhere in the universe. It just means that subjectively we feel still. So presence feels still. It's quiet. Or we could say quietness and stillness sort of give off a sense of presence through the body-mind. The more conscious we are of consciousness, that will also evoke a deeper or a greater sense of presence as well. But there's a sense of presence from the very beginning. Like, just if you walked in today and you never heard about spirituality, you would have your own sense of presence. Right? The feeling, the simple feeling of being.